Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you push, how much effort you pour into something, you just can't break free? Like you're trapped in a loop, repeating the same exhausting task over and over, only to watch all your progress vanish in an instant. That crushing sense of futility, the dread of an endless, unrewarding cycle, is something we've all faced in one way or another. But what if I told you this feeling has a name, and it's etched into one of the most haunting tales from Greek mythology? Meet Sisyphus, the cunning king whose punishment was to roll a massive boulder up a steep hill for all eternity, only to watch it tumble back down every single time. His story isn't just about divine retribution, it's a mirror held up to the human condition, a reflection of our own struggles with meaning, persistence, and the relentless weight of existence. Picture this, a man of unmatched wit and audacity, a ruler who thought he could outsmart the gods themselves. Sisyphus wasn't just any mortal. He was a trickster, a master manipulator who deceived death not once but twice. His cleverness knew no bounds, but so too did his arrogance. And when the gods finally had enough, they crafted a punishment so poetic, so devastatingly fitting, that it would echo through the ages. Imagine the sweat, the burning muscles, the sheer exhaustion of pushing that boulder inch by inch, only to lose it all at the very moment victory seemed within reach. That's the fate Zeus condemned him to, an eternal reminder that even the cleverest among us can't escape the consequences of defying the divine. But here's the thing, Sisyphus's story isn't just a cautionary tale about hubris. It's a paradox that's captivated philosophers, writers, and thinkers for centuries. Why? Because buried beneath the myth is a question that cuts to the core of what it means to be human. Is his punishment pure torment, or is there something strangely liberating about it? Could there be a kind of twisted triumph in accepting the absurdity of his task, in finding purpose not in the outcome but in the act itself? As we unravel the layers of this ancient myth, we'll explore the razor's edge between punishment and perseverance, between futility and defiance, because sometimes the greatest lessons aren't found in victory but in the struggle. And Sisyphus, his struggle is eternal. So let's roll that boulder together and see what truths we might uncover along the way. Long before the gods condemned him to his endless toil, Sisyphus was known as the shrewd and ambitious king of Corinth, a city he was said to have founded himself. His name became synonymous with cunning, a man who could talk his way out of any predicament, who saw deception as an art form, and perhaps that shouldn't be surprising given his lineage. He was the son of Aeolus, the divine keeper of the winds, a being capable of both tempest and calm. Some say that heritage is what gave Sisyphus his restless spirit, his knack for twisting words like gusts shaping the landscape. But while his father controlled the winds, Sisyphus sought to control fate itself. Corinth flourished under his rule, becoming a hub of trade and power. But it wasn't just prosperity that defined Sisyphus, it was audacity. He believed the rules didn't apply to him, that his cleverness could outmaneuver even death. That arrogance would define his legacy. Stories paint him as a trickster king who reveled in outsmarting foes and allies alike, crossing lines even other mortals wouldn't dare approach. Yet his greatest talent, his ability to lie with such conviction that reality itself seemed to bend, would eventually become his downfall. There's a reason the gods took notice. In myth, mortals who disrupt the natural order don't go unpunished for long. And Sisyphus didn't just disrupt it, he mocked it. Whether it was cheating death twice, betraying divine secrets, or trapping the god of thunder himself in a web of deceit, he made enemies where others would have shown humility. Yet for all his intelligence, he failed to grasp one simple truth. No mortal, no matter how brilliant, can outrun the consequences of defying Olympus. His story isn't just about a punishment, it's about the moment cunning meets its match, the instant ingenuity becomes hubris. Sisyphus didn't earn his reputation as a trickster by chance. It was a role he embraced, even flaunted. Among his earliest and most infamous exploits was the way he toyed with travelers passing through Corinth. The city sat at a strategic crossroads, and Sisyphus, ever the opportunist, saw profit in deception. Some versions of the myth claim he would invite weary guests into his palace, offering lavish hospitality, only to murder them in cold blood once they let their guard down. Others say he rigged the roads themselves, diverting merchants into traps where he'd ambush them, seizing their goods without a shred of remorse. His crimes weren't just cruel, they were a direct challenge to the sacred laws of hospitality, known as xenia, which Zeus himself enforced. To violate xenia wasn't just wicked, it was an insult to the gods, a slap in the face to the divine order, and Sisyphus, he didn't just slap, he reveled in it. But his boldest trick wasn't stealing from mortals, it was cheating death. When Thanatos, the embodiment of death, came to claim him, Sisyphus played his most audacious hand. Feigning curiosity, he asked the god to demonstrate how the chains of the underworld worked, and the moment Thanatos obliged, Sisyphus clamped them shut, trapping death itself. With Thanatos imprisoned, no one could die. Wars raged without end, the wounded writhed in endless agony, and the natural cycle of life and death ground to a halt. The gods were furious. Ares, the god of war, finally stormed in to free Thanatos, restoring balance, but Sisyphus wasn't done. As death closed in a second time, he whispered to his wife not to perform the proper funeral rites. When he arrived in the underworld, he complained to Persephone that his wife had disrespected the dead, and begged for permission to return to the living world just long enough to scold her. Of course, once back in Corinth, he stayed, living in defiance for years before the gods finally dragged him back. These weren't just clever escapes, they were acts of sheer defiance. Every time Sisyphus outsmarted a god, he wasn't just saving his own skin. He was proving, at least to himself, that mortal wit could outplay divine will. But the gods don't take humiliation lightly. Each escape, each smirk, each moment he slipped through their fingers only sharpened their resolve to put him in his place. Because in the end, Sisyphus wasn't just mocking death, he was mocking the very fabric of the cosmos, the rules that even the mightiest mortals weren't meant to bend. And in Greek mythology, that kind of arrogance never goes unpunished. His exploits weren't just the prelude to his downfall, they were the reason it had to be eternal. Because for a man who thought he could outrun consequence, there could be no sharper lesson than an endless, futile task, one where no amount of cunning could ever set him free. Even for a man who thrived on deception, Sisyphus crossed a line that would seal his fate. He betrayed the king of the gods himself. It all began with Zeus's secret affair with Aegina, a river nymph whose beauty captivated even the most powerful deity. These divine trysts were common, but Zeus preferred discretion, especially since Aegina's father, the river god Asopus, was known for his fiery temper. No one dared expose the god's secrets until Sisyphus saw an opportunity. The cunning king struck a deal with Asopus. He'd reveal Aegina's whereabouts in exchange for a permanent freshwater spring for Corinth, turning the parched land into a thriving oasis. It was a calculated move. Sisyphus gained a priceless resource for his city while driving a wedge between two gods. But playing informant to Zeus's love life wasn't just risky, it was suicidal. When Zeus discovered the betrayal, his wrath was volcanic. Thunder shook the heavens as Olympus trembled. No one humiliated the Lord of the Sky and walked away unscathed. This wasn't just another trick, it was a direct assault on divine authority. Mortals weren't meant to meddle in the affairs of gods, let alone weaponize their secrets. Sisyphus had already cheated death, mocked hospitality laws, and now he'd turned Zeus into a laughingstock. The message was clear, his cunning had curdled into hubris. And in Greek mythology, hubris never ends well, yet there's a chilling irony to his crime. Sisyphus, the master manipulator, failed to foresee that his greatest con would backfire spectacularly. He'd spent a lifetime bending rules, but this time he'd tugged on a thread that unraveled his own destiny. because Zeus didn't just punish, he crafted torments that mirrored the crime. And for a man who treated the world like a chessboard, what could be crueler than an unwinnable game? The boulder wasn't just a rock, it was the weight of his own arrogance rolled uphill for eternity. What does it take to make death itself pause? Sisyphus found out not through strength but through sheer audacity. When Thanatos, the solemn god of death, arrived to escort him to the underworld, most mortals would have trembled. Not Sisyphus. With a smirk and a calculated pause, he pretended fascination with the heavy chains Thanatos carried. "How do they work?" he asked, feigning innocent curiosity. The moment death demonstrated, click, the chain snapped shut around his own wrists. Just like that, the god of death was trapped in Sisyphus's palace, bound by his own tools. And with Thanatos imprisoned, something unprecedented happened. No one on Earth could die. Imagine the chaos. Battlefields turned into nightmares of endless suffering, where warriors hacked at each other with no release. The wounded writhed in perpetual agony, begging for a mercy that wouldn't come. Even the gods noticed the natural order was collapsing. Mortals weren't meant to linger between life and death like this. But Sisyphus, ever the opportunist, reveled in his victory. For him, it wasn't just about avoiding his own fate, it was proof that a mortal could outthink the divine. He'd turned the universe into a game, and for a while he was winning. The gods, however, don't tolerate chaos for long. Ares, the god of war, finally stormed down from Olympus. Battlefields were his domain, and this unnatural stalemate offended him. With a roar, he shattered the chains, freeing Thanatos and restoring death's grim work. Sisyphus's triumph was over, or so it seemed, because while the gods expected submission, what they got was something far more dangerous. A man who'd tasted defiance and craved more. Locking up death wasn't just a stunt, it was a declaration, and in that moment Sisyphus proved something terrifying. The natural order wasn't invincible. It could be bent, even broken, if you were clever enough, but here's the twist: his brilliance became his fatal flaw. By cheating death once, he'd earned the god's fury. By doing it again, as he soon would, he'd ensure his punishment would be legendary. Because in Greek mythology, defiance isn't just punished, it's answered with poetic cruelty. And for a man who thought he could outwit the universe, there could be no better torment than an endless, futile task. The boulder wasn't just waiting, it was his destiny, rolling closer with every trick he pulled. Even trapped in the underworld, Sisyphus couldn't resist one last con. This time, his mark wasn't a traveler or a god. It was Persephone, queen of the dead herself. With practiced theatrics, he spun a tale of indignation, claiming his wife had left his body unburied, denying him the proper rites. In the ancient world, this was sacrilege. A soul couldn't rest without burial, left to wander as a restless shade. Sisyphus, ever the performer, clasped his hands in mock despair. How could he find peace when his own wife had betrayed him? All he asked was a brief return to the living world, just long enough to chastise her and ensure his dignity in death. Persephone, no stranger to sorrow, reluctantly agreed. Perhaps she pitied him, or perhaps she underestimated the depths of his deceit. But the moment Sisyphus stepped back into the sunlight, he shed his grief like a cloak. No scolding, no funeral rites, just the smug grin of a man who'd played the system yet again. He resumed his throne as if nothing had happened, feasting and ruling while the underworld waited in vain. For years he dodged his fate, lounging in Corinth's palaces while the gods fumed. This wasn't just escape, it was a slap in the face to divine justice. Sisyphus had turned the underworld's mercy into a loophole, exploiting Persephone's compassion as coldly as he'd once ambushed travelers. But the gods don't tolerate mockery forever. Hermes, the swift messenger, finally dragged him back, this time with no more patience for tricks. The lesson was clear: no mortal, no matter how clever, cheats death twice without consequences. And for Sisyphus, those consequences would be etched into legend, not just as punishment but as a warning. because in the end, his greatest trick wasn't outsmarting the gods, it was proving how far pride could push a man toward ruin. The gods had finally reached their limit. Sisyphus's endless defiance wasn't just an annoyance, it was a threat to the very order of the cosmos. Zeus, his patience exhausted, convened the Olympians, and their verdict was unanimous: no more tricks, no more escapes. This time, the punishment would be inescapable, a torment so perfectly designed that even the cunning king of Corinth couldn't talk or scheme his way out of it. They cast him into Tartarus, the abyss beneath the underworld, where only the most irredeemable souls were sent. But for Sisyphus, mere banishment wasn't enough. The gods wanted his suffering to be a lesson etched into eternity. Tartarus wasn't just darkness, it was a realm of crushing futility, where time stretched endlessly and hope withered like a forgotten vine. Here, the gods crafted a punishment that mirrored his crimes with cruel precision. A colossal boulder, smooth and unyielding, awaited him at the base of a steep, jagged hill. His task was simple: push it to the summit, but the moment his hands left the stone, it would come thundering back down, forcing him to begin again. No pause, no rest, no reward, just the same crushing labor over and over until time itself meant nothing. What makes this punishment so devastating isn't just the physical strain, it's the psychological torment. Sisyphus wasn't condemned to failure, he was condemned to almost succeeding. Every muscle straining, every step upward fueling the illusion that this time he might conquer the impossible. And then, at the very brink of triumph, the boulder would slip, rolling past him with mocking indifference. The gods didn't just want him to suffer, they wanted him to understand the futility of his defiance. For a man who'd spent his life outsmarting fate, there could be no sharper hell than an unwinnable game. Yet there's a haunting beauty to the symmetry of his fate. Sisyphus, who'd trapped Thanatos in chains, was now bound to his own eternal task. The man who'd mocked the natural order was forced to embody its cruelest irony: effort without end, struggle without meaning. Even in punishment, he became a symbol not just of hubris but of the human condition itself, because in the end, his story isn't just about the wrath of the gods. It's about the weight we all carry, the boulders we push in our own lives, and the quiet, terrifying question of whether any of it matters. The gods thought they'd broken him. But as we'll see, the most fascinating part of Sisyphus's tale isn't his punishment, it's what he does with it. The boulder loomed before him, an impossible weight, smooth and unyielding, its surface reflecting no light in the shadowed depths of Tartarus. Sisyphus pressed his palms against the cold stone, muscles taut as he began his first push. The slope stretched upward, jagged and steep, disappearing into a haze that mocked the very idea of a summit. Every inch gained was a battle. The ground crumbled beneath his feet, his breath came in ragged gasps, and the boulder resisted as if it had a will of its own. But he pushed anyway, sweat mingling with the dust of the underworld, his body screaming in protest, and then, just as the peak seemed within reach, the unthinkable. A slight shift in balance, a whisper of momentum lost, and the boulder slipped. It rolled backward slowly at first, as if savoring his disbelief, before crashing down with a force that shook the earth. Sisyphus could only watch, paralyzed, as it tumbled past him, coming to rest exactly where he'd begun. The silence that followed was worse than the effort. No applause, no pity, just the quiet certainty that he'd do it all over again, and again, and again. This wasn't just labor, it was the cruelest kind of theater. The gods hadn't merely sentenced him to endless toil, they'd designed a spectacle of futility where every near triumph was a setup for devastation. Imagine the psychological torture, the fleeting hope each time he climbed higher, the way his body memorized every groove of the path, only to be betrayed at the last possible moment. There was no variation, no mercy, just the relentless rhythm of rise and fall, a pendulum swinging between exertion and despair, yet the true genius of his punishment lay in its precision. Sisyphus, the man who'd outsmarted death, was now trapped in a loop where cunning meant nothing. No words could charm the boulder, no trick could flatten the hill. His greatest strength, his mind, was rendered useless. The gods didn't just want him to suffer, they wanted him to understand the futility of resistance. Every time the stone rolled back, it carried the same unspoken message. This is the cost of defiance, but here's the haunting part. The myth doesn't show Sisyphus weeping or begging for reprieve. He simply turns, walks back down, and starts again. There's a grim dignity in that. No matter how many times the boulder wins, he refuses to stay at the bottom. And in that refusal, in the sheer act of continuing, the story twists into something unexpected. Because if punishment is meant to break the spirit, then Sisyphus's unbroken resolve, his willingness to push despite knowing the outcome, becomes its own kind of rebellion. The gods may have designed his torment, but they couldn't control how he faced it. That's why this image endures, not just as a warning against hubris, but as a mirror. Haven't we all felt like Sisyphus at some point, stuck in cycles, work, routines, personal struggles where progress feels temporary and exhaustion permanent? The myth forces us to confront a terrifying question. What if our efforts are futile? But it also offers a quieter, more subversive one. What if the act of pushing anyway is its own answer? That boulder isn't just a rock, it's a mirror, smooth, unyielding, and indifferent. It reflects back at us the essence of human struggle. Think about the jobs we slog through day after day, the routines that drain us only to reset each morning, the goals that seem perpetually out of reach. Sisyphus's boulder is all of these things, a metaphor for the grind that defines so much of existence. But here's the twist, it's also a paradox. Because while the myth paints his task as the ultimate punishment, it's also a startlingly accurate portrait of the human condition. We're all pushing something up a hill, even if we don't always feel the weight of it. The boulder's symbolism cuts deeper when you consider how it embodies the concept of absurdity. Philosophers like Albert Camus saw Sisyphus not as a tortured soul, but as an icon of rebellion. In a universe that offers no inherent meaning, Camus argued, the act of persisting anyway becomes a kind of defiance. The boulder rolls back down, yes, but Sisyphus chooses to push it again. That choice, that stubborn refusal to surrender to futility, is where the myth transcends punishment and becomes something profoundly human. It's not about the outcome, it's about the act itself. The boulder isn't just a weight, it's a canvas for meaning, one we're forced to paint ourselves. Modern life is full of these Sisyphean tasks, the inbox that never empties, the traffic that never eases, the deadlines that multiply like Hydra's heads. We're surrounded by cycles that mock our efforts, yet we keep showing up. Why? Because somewhere in the struggle we find scraps of purpose. The barista who crafts the same latte hundreds of times a day might find joy in the precision of the pour. The parent repeating the same bedtime routine might cling to the fleeting warmth of a child's laugh. The boulder isn't just crushing us, it's shaping us. But there's a darker layer here too. The myth forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that not all labor is noble. Some tasks are genuinely empty, designed to wear us down without reward. Think of the mind-numbing spreadsheets, the soul-sucking commutes, the bureaucratic hoops that exist only to perpetuate themselves. These are the boulders society straps to our backs, and unlike Sisyphus, we don't always get to choose them. The brilliance of the myth lies in its duality. It's both a warning about systems that exploit our labor and a challenge to find agency within them. What makes the boulder so haunting isn't its size or its weight, it's the silence. No one cheers for Sisyphus, no god leans down to whisper encouragement. His struggle is solitary, witnessed only by the indifferent walls of Tartarus. And isn't that the unspoken fear beneath our own daily grind? That we're toiling in the dark, that no one sees the effort, that it might all amount to nothing. The myth strips away the illusion of external validation, leaving only the raw question, what keeps you pushing when no one's watching? Yet within that question lies a strange freedom. If the boulder will never stay at the summit, then the value can't be in reaching the top. It has to be in the climb, in the muscles forged, the resolve tested, the small victories of each inch gained. Sisyphus's curse isn't just a lesson about the god's wrath, it's an invitation to redefine success. Maybe the boulder isn't the enemy, maybe it's the thing that teaches us how strong we really are. After all, a life without struggle isn't a life, it's a void. And in that void, even a cursed boulder starts to look like a purpose. That hill isn't just a backdrop, it's a character in its own right, carved with intention by the gods to amplify Sisyphus's torment. Imagine the slope, impossibly steep, its surface slick with loose gravel designed to sabotage every step. This wasn't a random patch of underworld real estate, it was a meticulously crafted stage for psychological warfare. The incline itself is the first cruelty. A gentler hill might offer the illusion of progress, but this one, its sharp angle ensures that every ounce of effort is met with resistance, turning what could be a grueling climb into a near-vertical battle against gravity. The gods didn't just want Sisyphus to work, they wanted him to feel the futility in his bones, but the hill's true malevolence lies in its cyclical design. Unlike a mountain with a fixed peak, this path offers no finality. The summit isn't a destination, it's a taunt. Just as Sisyphus nears the top, the ground beneath him seems to shift, the boulder's weight redistributing in a way that guarantees failure. It's a masterclass in cruelty. The moment hope flares brightest is the moment it's ripped away. The hill mirrors his crimes just as he trapped others in cycles of betrayal. Now he's ensnared in an endless loop of his own. Every descent back to the base is a reminder. No scheme, no matter how clever, can outmaneuver divine justice. Yet there's deeper symbolism here. The hill represents the universal human struggle against forces larger than ourselves, systems, bureaucracies, even our own limitations. Think of the student taking out loans for a degree that won't guarantee a job, the artist churning out work for an algorithm that never rewards them, the parent juggling responsibilities while the pile of bills never shrinks. The hill isn't just a mythological construct, it's the embodiment of life's recurring frustrations, the ones that leave us whispering, why bother? And that's precisely the point. The gods didn't choose a hill at random, they chose it because it's a mirror. Its steepness reflects the absurdity of human ambition, the way we keep striving in a world that often feels rigged against us. But here's the subversive truth the myth whispers. The hill's purpose isn't just to break Sisyphus, it's to reveal him, strip away the tricks, the lies, the divine feuds, and what's left. A man alone with his task, forced to confront the raw essence of perseverance. The hill isn't just his punishment, it's his reckoning. Imagine the precise moment when hope turns to ash. Sisyphus, muscles burning, heaves the boulder upward one last time, the summit so close he can taste it. His fingers dig into the stone's rough edges, his spine bowed under the weight, but he pushes harder, convinced this time will be different. Then the slip, a shudder of the boulder, a whisper of gravel giving way beneath his feet, and suddenly the stone is rolling backward, gaining speed as it plummets past him. That split second of realization is worse than the physical strain. The knowledge that every drop of sweat, every strained sinew was for nothing again. This isn't just exhaustion, it's psychological warfare. The gods didn't merely curse Sisyphus with endless labor, they weaponized hope itself. Each ascent follows the same cruel rhythm. First determination, then desperation, then the fleeting, feverish belief that this push will be the one. The mind clings to possibility, even in Tartarus, but that's the torture. By letting him brush against success before snatching it away, the gods ensure his punishment renews itself eternally. It's not the boulder that breaks him, it's the cycle. The way each failure hollows him out, leaving less of himself to start over. And here's the true horror Sisyphus remembers. This isn't some reset where his mind wipes clean between attempts. He carries every failed push with him, the cumulative weight of eternity pressing down just as hard as the rock. Picture the toll of that awareness, knowing as he trudges back down the hill that no lesson learned will change the outcome. No adjustment in grip, no shift in footing will ever be enough. The gods didn't just condemn his body, they trapped his mind in a labyrinth with no exit. Yet the most devastating twist lies in the silence. No audience gasps as the boulder falls. No fellow prisoners offer sympathy. His suffering is solitary, unfolding in a void where even anguish echoes unheard. In isolation, the mind turns inward, gnawing at itself. What begins as frustration curdles into something worse, the erosion of meaning. Without witnesses, without progress, even rage loses its purpose. What's left is a chilling numbness, the hollowed-out shell of a man who once defied death but now can't muster the energy to curse the gods. But here's the paradox. In breaking him, the gods accidentally reveal something profound. Sisyphus's torment mirrors our own battles with futility. The jobs that drain us, the relationships that cycle through the same fights, the goals that recede no matter how fast we run. His punishment works because it's universal. We've all tasted that moment when effort doesn't equate to outcome, when the universe seems to shrug at our struggle. The genius of the myth isn't just in the scale of the torment, it's in how intimately we recognize it, and that recognition forces a question. Is Sisyphus truly broken, or is his refusal to stop, even in the face of certain failure, its own kind of rebellion? The gods may have stripped him of victory, but they couldn't strip him of choice. Every time he plants his feet and presses his palms to the stone, he's asserting something they can't take, the will to continue. In that sense, his spirit isn't shattered, it's distilled. The man who once tricked gods is now reduced to his essence, a single, unwavering act of defiance. The boulder rolls back, yes, but Sisyphus rolls forward. Greek mythology loves its poetic punishments, but none sting quite like Sisyphus's eternal loop. Compare him to Prometheus, the titan who stole fire for humanity. Both defied divine order, yet their torments couldn't be more different. Prometheus was chained to a rock, his liver torn out daily by an eagle, only to regenerate overnight. Brutal, absolutely, but there's a key distinction. His suffering had a clear cause and effect. Each day brought fresh agony, yes, but also a reset, a perverse kind of rhythm. Sisyphus, meanwhile, faces no variation, no cathartic release. Just the same boulder, the same hill, the same crushing déjà vu. Then there's Tartarus, another king who thought he could outwit the gods. His crime, serving his own son as a meal to test the gods' omniscience. His punishment, standing in a pool beneath fruit-laden branches, forever starving, forever parched. Water recedes when he kneels, fruit lifts when he reaches. Like Sisyphus, he's trapped in endless desire. But here's the twist. Tantalus's torment is about almost quenching, almost eating. Sisyphus's is about almost succeeding. One dangles fulfillment just out of reach, the other snatches it from his grasp at the last possible second. The genius of these punishments lies in their precision. Each reflects the sinner's crime like a dark funhouse mirror. Prometheus, the giver of knowledge, endures eternal consumption, a metaphor for how wisdom devours its bearer. Tantalus, who violated hospitality, suffers the ultimate guest's nightmare, a feast he can never join. But Sisyphus, his punishment isn't just about pain, it's about erasing progress itself. Where Prometheus and Tantalus cling to fragments of hope, another day, another reach, Sisyphus is denied even that. His torment isn't cyclical, it's a flat circle, scrubbing away the very concept of forward motion. What makes Sisyphus's fate uniquely cruel is its assault on agency. Prometheus chose his fate knowingly, embracing martyrdom. Tantalus's punishment is reactive. His body betrays him, but his mind remains sharp, forever scheming. Sisyphus, he's reduced to a machine, mind and body locked in unison, performing labor stripped of all meaning. The gods didn't just punish his actions, they hollowed out his very essence. No wonder his story lingers in our collective psyche. In a world where progress often feels illusory, Sisyphus isn't just a cautionary tale. He's our shadow, pushing invisible boulders in the dark. Even in the ancient world, Sisyphus's legend loomed large, so much so that Homer himself immortalized the cunning king in the Odyssey. When Odysseus ventures to the underworld in Book 11, he witnesses the tormented souls of the dead, and among them, Sisyphus stands out. Homer doesn't linger on his punishment, but the description is stark. I saw Sisyphus in agonizing torment, trying to roll a monstrous boulder uphill with both hands. That single line captures the visceral horror of his fate, the sweat, the strain, the sheer physicality of a struggle with no end. But what's fascinating is what Homer doesn't say. There's no mention of the boulder rolling back, no detail about the cycle. It's as if the mere image of a man straining against an impossible weight was enough to evoke recognition in audiences thousands of years ago. Homer's choice to include Sisyphus among the great sinners alongside figures like Tantalus and Tityos speaks volumes about how deeply his story resonated. This wasn't just a cautionary tale, it was a cultural touchstone, a shared reference point for what happens when mortal ambition collides with divine will. The fact that Odysseus, the ultimate trickster hero, glimpses Sisyphus during his own journey adds another layer of irony. Here's a man who cheated death multiple times, staring at the fate that could have been his had he pushed the gods too far. It's a mirror held up to Odysseus's own cunning, a silent warning woven into the epic, but Homer's depiction also hints at something subtler, the Greeks' conflicted relationship with cleverness itself. Sisyphus wasn't just a villain, he was a paradox. His intelligence was undeniable, even admirable, but it curdled into something dangerous when unchecked by humility. In a society that revered heroes like Odysseus for their wit, Sisyphus served as a boundary marker, a reminder that some lines couldn't be crossed, no matter how sharp the mind. The Odyssey doesn't just show us his torment, it invites us to reckon with the tension between admiration and condemnation, between the thrill of outsmarting fate and the cost of doing so. This duality explains why Sisyphus's story endured long after Homer. Playwrights, poets, and philosophers kept returning to him, each adding new layers to his myth. Was he a cautionary fool or a tragic hero, a warning against hubris or a symbol of resilience? Homer's brief but potent mention set the stage for these debates, anchoring Sisyphus in the Greek imagination as a figure who couldn't be easily dismissed. Because even in silence, even as the boulder rolled back unnoticed in the underworld's shadows, his struggle echoed. It still does. Centuries after the ancient Greeks carved Sisyphus's torment into myth, a philosopher named Albert Camus picked up that boulder and turned it into something startling, a manifesto. In his 1942 essay The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus didn't just retell the story, he flipped it on its head. Where the ancients saw divine punishment, Camus saw raw humanity. Where they saw futility, he found defiance. His radical reinterpretation asked a question that still echoes today. What if Sisyphus isn't a cautionary tale, but the ultimate absurd hero? Camus's philosophy of the absurd starts with a simple, unsettling truth. Life has no inherent meaning. The universe doesn't care about our struggles, our dreams, or our boulders. Yet here we are, relentlessly pushing anyway. That tension between our hunger for purpose and the silence that answers back is what Camus called the absurd. And Sisyphus, he's the perfect embodiment of it, condemned to meaningless labor, fully aware of its futility, yet choosing to continue. For Camus, that's not tragedy, it's rebellion. The moment Sisyphus walks back down the hill to retrieve his boulder, Camus argues, is where the myth transforms. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, he writes. Not the summit, not the victory, but the act of showing up again and again despite knowing the outcome. That's where meaning is forged, not in external rewards, but in the internal choice to persist. Imagine the weight of that realization for a post-war Europe grappling with existential dread. Camus offered no comforting illusions, no higher powers, just the stark, liberating truth that we get to define our own purpose, even in the face of the void. But Camus takes it further. He paints Sisyphus not as a broken man, but as someone strangely content. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, he concludes, a line that still sparks debate. Happy, how? The key lies in acceptance. Once Sisyphus acknowledges the absurdity of his task, he's free. No more false hopes, no more rage against the gods, just the clarity of his own agency. In that light, the boulder becomes almost sacred. It's no longer a curse, it's his to push, his to own, his to infuse with whatever meaning he chooses. This interpretation ripples through modern life in ways Camus couldn't have predicted. Think of the nurse working consecutive shifts in an understaffed hospital, the artist creating despite indifference, the parent grinding through sleepless nights. None are guaranteed success, yet they persist. Camus would argue that's where their power lies, not in changing the system, but in refusing to let the system change them. Sisyphus's hill isn't just Tartarus, it's the daily grind we all climb, and his lesson isn't about futility, it's about finding freedom within the grind. Yet critics push back. Is this just dressing up despair in pretty words? Can we really call endless struggle empowering? Some argue Camus romanticizes suffering, turning systemic exploitation into a personal philosophy. Others counter that he's not praising the boulder, he's praising the pusher. The distinction matters. Sisyphus isn't happy because of his torment. He's happy in spite of it, by claiming ownership over his response. That nuance makes the myth a Rorschach test. Some see resignation, others see resilience. What's undeniable is how Camus's take reframes the entire myth. The gods thought they'd crushed Sisyphus with inevitability, but in embracing the inevitable, he outwits them one final time. No chains can bind a man who's made peace with his boulder. And that's the twist no Olympian saw coming. In a universe without meaning, the greatest rebellion is to decide your own. Camus didn't just reinterpret Sisyphus, he cracked open the myth to reveal a radical truth about existence. At the heart of his philosophy lies the absurd, the dizzying collision between our human craving for meaning and the universe's cold indifference. Picture standing at the edge of a cliff, shouting questions into the void only to hear silence echo back. That's the absurd, not despair, not nihilism, but the raw confrontation with a world that refuses to explain itself. And here's where Sisyphus becomes more than a punished king. He's every one of us, rolling our boulders up life's hill, knowing full well they'll roll back down. But Camus's genius was in spotting the loophole the gods missed. If life has no predefined meaning, then the power to create it lies squarely with us. Sisyphus's torment isn't in the futility of his task, it's in his initial resistance to it. The moment he accepts that the boulder will fall, that no amount of straining will ever secure it at the summit, something shifts. His struggle ceases to be a punishment and becomes a choice. Camus writes, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, not the outcome, the act of showing up." That's the rebellion, to look the absurd in the eye and say, "I'll push anyway." Think of the modern parallels, the writer drafting novels that may never be published. The teacher grading papers in a broken system, the activist marching despite setbacks. None are guaranteed success, yet they persist. Camus would argue these aren't tragedies, they're victories. Because in a universe that offers no promises, the mere decision to engage is an act of defiance. Sisyphus's boulder isn't just a weight, it's his raison d'etre. By embracing the grind, he steals back the narrative. The gods wanted him crushed by futility. Instead, he becomes the author of his own fate. Critics often mistake Camus's absurdism for bleakness, but that misses the point entirely. This isn't about resigning to meaninglessness, it's about liberation. When you stop demanding that life hand you purpose on a silver platter, you're free to craft your own. Imagine the relief of releasing that weight. No more frantic searches for the point, no more measuring your worth by external validation. The boulder is yours. The hill is yours, the meaning you carve from the effort, that's yours too. Camus takes it further with his infamous conclusion: one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Not because he's deluded, but because he's lucid. Happiness here isn't joy, it's the quiet satisfaction of alignment. Sisyphus no longer rages against his fate, he owns it. And in that ownership, he finds a peculiar kind of freedom. The modern equivalent might be the exhausted parent who finds solace in bedtime stories, or the burnt-out worker who rediscovers pride in small, perfect tasks. They're not ignoring the grind, they're redefining it. Yet here's the kicker: Camus's absurdism isn't a free pass to glorify suffering. It's a call to Chinese letter to see the boulders in our lives clearly without illusion. Some burdens are worth carrying, others are systems that should be dismantled. The line between perseverance and martyrdom is thin, but for those tasks we can't escape, the ones that feel as eternal as Sisyphus's hill, Camus offers a toolkit: revolt refusing to be broken, freedom choosing your attitude, and passion investing fully despite the odds. So the next time you're trapped in your own version of the cycle, the emails that regenerate like hydra heads, the dreams that slip through your fingers, remember Sisyphus. Not as a cautionary tale, but as a mirror. Your boulder isn't your enemy, it's your raw material. The gods may have designed the hill, but you get to decide how you climb. Sisyphus's boulder has rolled far beyond the ancient world, crashing into modern literature with unexpected force. Writers today don't just retell his myth, they reinvent it, bending the story to reflect everything from political struggles to personal burnout. Take Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, where two characters pass time by debating whether they should help a man straining with a heavy bag, a direct nod to Sisyphus. But here's the twist: unlike the original myth, Beckett's version strips away even the illusion of purpose. There's no hill, no gods, just endless waiting and a bag that might as well be filled with air. It's Sisyphus for the post-war generation, where futility isn't punishment, it's the default state. Then there's Margaret Atwood's The Penelopiad, which reimagines Homer's Odyssey from his wife's perspective. Atwood's Penelope compares her weaving and unweaving to Sisyphus's labor, drawing a parallel between domestic drudgery and eternal torment. But where the ancient myth frames the cycle as divine retribution, Atwood recasts it as something quietly revolutionary: the repetitive, unseen labor of women keeping households and myths intact. Suddenly, the boulder isn't just a symbol of despair, it's a testament to persistence in the face of erasure. Poetry, too, has embraced Sisyphus as a muse. Albert Camus's influence looms large, especially in works like Charles Bukowski's The Laughing Heart, where the speaker urges, "Don't let them kill you." It's a gritty, blue-collar take on Camus's absurd hero, Sisyphus as the graveyard shift worker clocking in despite the grind, but contrast that with Sylvia Plath's Mushrooms, where quiet, relentless growth under pressure mirrors the myth. Plath's fungi don't rage against their conditions, they thrive in the dark, turning oppression into a kind of power. Even genre fiction gets in on the act. Sci-fi legend Ursula K. Le Guin's The Ones Who Walk Away from Homeless presents a chilling twist, a utopia built on the suffering of a single child, the citizens who stay. They're Sisyphus figures pushing the boulder of collective guilt uphill every day. Those who leave, they're the ones who finally drop the rock and walk away, a radical reinterpretation of what rebellion looks like. What makes these adaptations so compelling isn't just their creativity, it's how they expose the myth's elasticity. Sisyphus can embody everything from proletariat solidarity in Marxist readings to the monotony of modern office life in satirical webcomics. Every generation rolls the boulder anew, imprinting it with their own struggles. And that's the real magic of the myth. It's not a static warning from the past, but a living metaphor, always ready to reflect whatever weight we're carrying. Sisyphus hasn't just lingered in ancient texts, he's crashed into our living rooms through shows like Rick and Morty, where the myth gets a darkly comic twist. In one episode, Rick builds an entire microverse to power his car battery, enslaving a civilization to push a treadmill forever. It's Sisyphus with a sci-fi paint job, the same endless labor, but now with biting satire about exploitation and the illusion of progress. The genius of this reference, it doesn't just retell the myth, it weaponizes it, forcing us to laugh while squirming at how easily we accept modern versions of the same futile cycles. Music, too, has echoed Sisyphus's struggle. Radiohead's Like Spinning Plates captures the dizzying futility of his task with lyrics like, "While you make pretty speeches, I'm being cut to shreds." The song's eerie, backward-masked instrumentation mirrors the myth's cyclical torment, a sonic embodiment of effort leading nowhere. Even punk bands like The Offspring nod to the myth in Hammerhead, where the chorus, over and over and over again, becomes a rallying cry for anyone stuck in life's relentless loops. These artists don't just reference Sisyphus, they channel his existential dread into rhythm and rhyme, proving how timeless his struggle really is. Film takes it further. Groundhog Day is Sisyphus in a snow globe, Bill Murray reliving the same day, trapped in a cycle until he finds meaning in repetition. The movie's brilliance lies in its inversion of the myth, where Sisyphus is punished, Phil Connors is redeemed. But the DNA is the same, the crushing weight of monotony, the slow unraveling of sanity, and finally, the choice to either succumb or transform. Even blockbusters like Mad Max, Fury Road borrow the theme, with Immortan Joe's War Boys chanting, "I live, I die, I live again." A nihilistic mantra that turns Sisyphus's curse into a twisted sacrament. Video games, though, might be where the myth hits hardest. In Hades, players battle through ever-shifting dungeons, dying repeatedly only to start anew, a mechanic that literally makes them Sisyphus. The game even features a character named Sisyphus, reimagined as a cheeky rebel who's made peace with his boulder. It's a masterstroke. The player feels the myth's frustration in their fingers, dying 100 times to reach an ending that resets. But here's the kicker, unlike the original tale, the game rewards persistence. Each failure unlocks new dialogue, new insights, turning futility into growth. Even advertising can't resist Sisyphus. A famous insurance commercial shows a man pushing a boulder uphill, only for it to roll back as the tagline promises, "We'll help you carry the load." It's proof of how deeply the myth has seeped into our collective subconscious, so familiar it can sell car insurance. But it also reveals something unsettling. Modern life has so many Sisyphean tasks that we've commercialized relief from them. The boulder isn't just a metaphor anymore, it's a marketing tool. What makes these pop culture nods so powerful isn't their creativity, it's their adaptability. Sisyphus's curse morphs to fit every era, every medium. In a Rick and Morty, he's a critique of capitalism. In Radiohead, he's the voice of despair. In Hades, he's a playable antihero. The myth's core struggle without end resonates because it's universal. We've all had days where we're pushing that boulder, whether it's a dead-end job, a creative project, or just the grind of existence. Pop culture doesn't just reference Sisyphus, it holds up a mirror and asks, "See, you know this feeling too." And perhaps that's why the myth endures. It's not about ancient gods or cursed kings, it's about us. Every time a songwriter screams into the void, or a game forces us to respawn, or a TV show makes us laugh at the absurdity of it all, Sisyphus rolls his boulder into the modern world. The hill might look different now, but the climb, that hasn't changed at all. Scientists have actually studied what happens to the human brain when faced with endless, repetitive tasks, and the results might make you glance nervously at your daily to-do list. Back in the 1950s, psychologist Harry Harlow conducted experiments with monkeys solving simple puzzles. At first, the animals tackled the tasks with curiosity and enthusiasm, but when the puzzles offered no new challenges or rewards, their interest flatlined. Harlow called this phenomenon extinction, the moment effort stops feeling meaningful. Sound familiar? It's Sisyphus in a lab coat, proving that even without divine curses, our minds revolt against cycles devoid of progress. Modern workplaces have turned this principle into an art form. Think of the data entry clerk typing the same spreadsheet 8 hours a day, or the call center worker reciting identical scripts to disinterested customers. Psychologists now recognize this as task monotony burnout, a state where repetition doesn't just bore us, it erodes our sense of self. Studies show that when tasks lack variability or purpose, our brains produce less dopamine, the chemical that fuels motivation. Without it, we're left pushing mental boulders uphill, drained yet unable to stop. The twist: unlike Sisyphus, many of us choose these cycles, trading autonomy for paychecks. But here's where the myth gets uncomfortably real. A 2018 study in the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology found that employees in repetitive roles weren't just unhappy, they experienced cognitive depreciation, a gradual dulling of problem-solving skills. Like Sisyphus's muscles memorizing every groove of his boulder, their brains adapted to the grind by shutting down higher functions. The researchers called it the automation of the self, where workers essentially become scripts performing tasks on loop. One nurse interviewed described it as existing in grayscale, her once sharp clinical intuition flattened by years of filling identical electronic health records. Yet there's a paradox hiding in these findings. While endless repetition breaks some, others find strange comfort in it. Take Tokyo's famed shokunin artisans who spend decades perfecting a single craft, like molding the same pottery shape 30,000 times. Psychologist Angela Duckworth frames this as grit, the ability to sustain passion for long-term goals. But the line between grit and Sisyphean despair is razor-thin. The difference: control. A shokunin chooses their boulder, Sisyphus had his thrust upon him. Modern work cultures often blur this distinction, reframing exploitation as passion or hustle. Neuroscience reveals even darker parallels. Brain scans of people performing menial tasks show activity patterns eerily similar to those in chronic depression. The same numbed frontal lobes, the same overactive stress responses. It's as if the brain, when denied meaningful progress, defaults to a kind of waking hibernation. Some researchers compare it to the learned helplessness observed in animals given inescapable shocks. They stop trying to escape, even when opportunities arise. Sisyphus's boulder, then, isn't just physical. It's the mental conditioning that whispers, "Why bother?" The most chilling revelation comes from studies on retirement. People who spent decades in monotonous jobs often struggle more with post-work depression than those in dynamic roles. Without the boulder they'd grown to resent, they're left staring at the hill, realizing they'd mistaken motion for purpose. It's a modern twist on Camus's absurd hero, not finding happiness in the push, but waking up one day to ask, what was I pushing for? So where's the escape hatch? Psychologists suggest micro-rebellions, small acts of autonomy like rearranging tasks, adding creative flourishes, or connecting repetitive work to larger goals. Even Sisyphus might have found relief in chipping patterns into his boulder or racing himself to beat yesterday's time. The lesson isn't that all repetition is toxic, it's that meaninglessness is. The real curse isn't the boulder, it's being told you can't choose how to push it. At the heart of Sisyphus's torment lies a question that's haunted philosophers for millennia. Was his fate sealed the moment he first deceived a god, or did he always have the power to choose a different path? On one hand, the myths paint him as a man so bound to his cunning nature that defiance was his only language, tricking death, betraying Zeus, manipulating Persephone. Every act was a deliberate escalation, as if he couldn't help but poke the bear of divine authority. The gods didn't just punish him for his crimes, they punished him for his essence, for being a man who couldn't stop playing the game even when the stakes were cosmic. In this light, his boulder isn't just a sentence, it's the inevitable outcome of a personality that refused to bend. Yet there's another way to see it. What if Sisyphus's real tragedy wasn't his lack of free will, but his misuse of it? Every crossroads in his story offered an alternative. He could have honored the sacred laws of hospitality instead of murdering travelers, remained silent about Zeus's affair rather than trading secrets for a spring, accepted death with dignity instead of chaining Thanatos. The gods didn't strip him of choice, they forced him to live with the consequences of his worst ones. The boulder, then, becomes a twisted testament to his own agency, a physical manifestation of the weight we all carry when we double down on destructive paths. Modern psychology adds a fascinating layer to this debate. Studies on determinism suggest our choices are heavily influenced by ingrained patterns, our own personal myths of behavior. A compulsive liar like Sisyphus might feel trapped by their own wiring, convinced deception is their only tool. But therapists would argue that even deeply entrenched habits can be rewired with awareness and effort. So was Sisyphus doomed by nature, or did he simply refuse to pick up the tools to change? The myth doesn't give us answers, but it forces us to ask the same of ourselves. How often do we blame fate for cycles we're perpetuating? Camus's take flips the script entirely. In his view, Sisyphus's ultimate act of free will comes after the punishment begins. The moment he accepts his task without illusion, he steals back his autonomy. No one chooses their boulder's life, hands those out arbitrarily, but we do choose how to carry them. That's the paradox at the core of the myth. True freedom might not lie in escaping the grind, but in embracing it on your own terms. Imagine a version of the story where Sisyphus carves his name into the boulder each time it rolls down or races himself to push it faster. Suddenly, the torture becomes a challenge, the hill a proving ground. This isn't just philosophical gymnastics, it mirrors real-world battles with agency. Think of the addict who believes they're powerless over their cravings until one day they decide recovery is their boulder to push. Or the artist stuck in a dead-end job who carves out time to paint after hours, turning monotony into a backdrop for creativity. The common thread, recognizing that while we don't control every circumstance, we do control our relationship to them. Sisyphus's curse wasn't the labor, it was his refusal to see that even in chains he could still choose his posture. Here's where the myth gets uncomfortably personal. Most of us aren't chained to literal boulders, but we all have our versions, jobs that drain us, relationships that loop through the same fights, unhealthy habits we can't seem to quit. The easy out is to call these fate or bad luck, but Sisyphus's story whispers a harder truth. Agency often lies in the smallest choices, the decision to walk back down the hill when no one's watching. The silent resolve to place your hands on the stone one more time, the quiet rebellion of defining what the effort means to you. Perhaps that's why the image of Sisyphus endures. Not as a warning about the dangers of pride, but as a mirror for our own rationalizations. How much of our suffering comes from circumstances beyond our control, and how much from our refusal to change the script? The boulder rolls back every time, that part's non-negotiable, but the way we meet it, that's where the gods have no say. The gods didn't craft Sisyphus's punishment on a whim. They designed it with surgical precision, stitching cruelty and symbolism into every detail. But was this divine retribution truly about justice, or something far more chilling? From Olympus's heights, Zeus saw more than a rebellious king needing discipline. He saw an opportunity to send a message to every mortal who might dare challenge the natural order. The boulder wasn't just a tool of torment. It was a propaganda piece, a cosmic billboard screaming, "This is what happens when you overreach," and Hades, whose realm Sisyphus had mocked by cheating death twice. His contribution dripped with irony. A master of the underworld doesn't just punish, he curates suffering. What better way to humble a man who treated divine laws like playthings than to trap him in an unwinnable game of his own making? Yet the punishment's brilliance lies in its layers. This wasn't just about setting an example, it was about breaking Sisyphus's greatest weapon, his mind. The gods could have thrown him into a pit of flames or let the Furies tear him apart, but those punishments would have had edges, moments of climax, of catharsis. Instead, they chose a slow erosion, a cycle designed to hollow him out thought by thought. Imagine Zeus's smirk as he dictated the terms. Let him strain, let him hope, then watch him crumble when the boulder rolls back. It wasn't enough to hurt Sisyphus, they wanted him to understand his own insignificance. Every near success, every fleeting glimpse of the summit was a carefully calculated cruelty, a reminder that his cleverness meant nothing against their will. But there's another angle here, darker and more personal. The myths whisper that gods often punish mortals not for crimes but for embarrassing them. Sisyphus didn't just break rules, he made Zeus look foolish first by exposing his affair, then by turning death into a prisoner. Divine egos bruise easily. What if the boulder was less about justice and more about petty revenge? Picture Hades, still seething as he blueprints the hill's gradient, ensuring it's steep enough to maximize agony. Or Zeus refining the boulder's weight until it's just shy of impossible to push, savoring the poetic twist, the man who thought he could outmuscle fate crushed by literal weight. Yet for all their cunning, the gods might have miscalculated, because in their focus on breaking Sisyphus, they forgot something vital. Futility only wins if the victim surrenders. By walking back down the hill each time, by placing his hands on the stone without complaint, Sisyphus does the one thing they never anticipated: he adapts. The punishment was meant to erase his spirit, but what if it accidentally revealed something far more dangerous? A mortal so stubborn that even eternity can't dull his resolve. The gods wanted a cautionary tale. Instead, they got a paradox, a man whose defiance outlasts their wrath, and that might be the most terrifying lesson of all. Not all versions of the myth leave Sisyphus trapped in eternal torment. Some ancient fragments whisper of unexpected reprieves, alternative endings where the gods, perhaps weary of their own cruelty or swayed by his persistence, finally relent. One obscure variant from a lost Orphic hymn suggests Hermes, the messenger god, took pity on Sisyphus after centuries of watching his struggle. In this telling, Hermes convinces Zeus to grant clemency, arguing that even the worst offenders deserve redemption after enough time. The boulder crumbles to dust, and Sisyphus walks free, not as a triumphant hero, but as a weathered soul who's learned the cost of defiance. This twist transforms the myth from a warning about hubris into a meditation on mercy, asking whether eternal punishment truly serves justice or merely feeds the god's pride. Another rare version, carved into a set of weathered Cypriot tablets, claims Sisyphus outwits his punishment one final time. Here, he notices a flaw in the boulder's shape, a tiny groove where his fingers find purchase. Over eons, he trains himself to push at just the right angle, leveraging physics against divine design. One day, the boulder teeters at the summit and stays. The underworld trembles as the impossible happens. The cycle breaks. Hades himself appears, not in rage but with something like respect, acknowledging that even gods can underestimate mortal ingenuity. This ending doesn't absolve Sisyphus's crimes, but it shifts the moral, suggesting persistence, when paired with adaptation, can crack even the cruelest systems. The most radical retelling comes from a fragmented Alexandrian scroll where Persephone intervenes, moved by Sisyphus's unbroken will, and perhaps seeing her own captivity reflected in his, she strikes a bargain with Zeus. Sisyphus will be freed, but only if he carries the memory of his punishment into the mortal world as a living reminder. He wanders Earth as a storyteller, his tales of Tartarus so vivid they deter others from challenging the gods. Here, the focus isn't on punishment or escape, but on transformation. The boulder becomes a story, and stories, unlike rocks, can change the world. What's fascinating about these alternate endings isn't just their departure from the canonical myth, it's how they reshape its core questions. The traditional version forces us to grapple with futility, but these variants ask, what if the lesson isn't about accepting our chains but finding ways to loosen them? Or what if mercy, not torment, is the true mark of power? They don't soften Sisyphus's crimes, they complicate the idea of justice itself. Maybe the boulder was never the point, maybe it was always about who gets to decide when the pushing stops. These retellings also reveal how myths evolved to mirror the cultures that nurture them. The Orphic ending, with its emphasis on redemption, echoes mystery cult beliefs in spiritual purification. The Cypriot version, where cleverness triumphs, reflects a seafaring society that valued resourcefulness, and Persephone's intervention, that's Alexandrian feminism peeking through, casting the oft-silenced queen of the underworld as the arbiter of fate. Each variant isn't just a new ending, it's a window into ancient anxieties about power, forgiveness, and the limits of endurance. Yet for all their richness, these alternatives never eclipse the original. There's a reason the unbroken cycle endures. It taps into something primal about the human experience. We've all faced boulders that rolled back despite our sweat and tears. But the lesser-known versions, they're the quiet hope that lives in the shadow of that struggle, the whisper that says maybe, just maybe, not all curses are forever. Aristotle's definition of a tragic hero hinges on a delicate balance, a figure neither wholly virtuous nor irredeemably wicked, whose downfall springs from a fatal flaw, yet whose suffering stirs our empathy. So where does Sisyphus, the cunning king cursed to eternal futility, fit into this framework? At first glance, he seems more trickster than tragic, a man who thrives on chaos rather than nobility. But peel back the layers and you'll find a figure whose arrogance mirrors the hubris of Oedipus, whose relentless defiance echoes Prometheus, and whose punishment, so excessive in its cruelty, twists our sympathy in unexpected ways. Take his fatal flaw, not just deceit, but an unshakable belief in his own cleverness. Like Oedipus's relentless pursuit of truth or Achilles' pride, Sisyphus's intelligence curdles into hubris. He doesn't merely outmaneuver mortals, he toys with gods, treating divine laws as puzzles to solve rather than boundaries to respect. Yet there's a tragic grandeur in his refusal to yield. When he chains Thanatos, it's not just a stunt, it's a declaration that mortality itself is negotiable. That audacity, however reckless, resonates. We wince at his arrogance but can't help admiring the sheer scale of his defiance. Then there's the suffering. Aristotle insisted a tragic hero's punishment must feel disproportionate, amplifying our pity. Sisyphus's torment, an eternity of almosts, of hope perpetually crushed, is so meticulously cruel it borders on divine overkill. The gods don't just want him broken, they want him aware. Every time the boulder rolls back, it's not just muscle and bone that strain, it's his mind, forced to reconcile the futility of his labor with the irrepressible human instinct to try again. That psychological torture transcends mere vengeance. It's a dissection of the human spirit under duress, and in that dissection we see ourselves. But here's the twist: sympathy for Sisyphus isn't automatic. Unlike Oedipus, who blinds himself in remorse, Sisyphus never apologizes, never repents. His suffering doesn't cleanse him, it hardens him, yet that very stubbornness becomes its own tragic virtue. In a universe where gods demand submission, his unbroken will, even in futility, feels like a perverse kind of integrity. Camus saw this clearly. Sisyphus doesn't weep or beg. He chooses to push the boulder again. That choice, however futile, mirrors our own struggles against life's absurdities. The true test of a tragic hero lies in what they reveal about us. Sisyphus's story unsettles because it forces a confrontation with our own boulders, the tasks that feel meaningless, the systems that trap us, the flaws we can't outrun. His tragedy isn't just his punishment, it's the way his brilliance becomes his cage, and in that he earns our empathy not through redemption but through raw, unvarnished persistence. The gods may have designed his torment, but in enduring it, he steals back something they never intended, the dignity of the struggle itself. The myth of Sisyphus isn't just an ancient cautionary tale. It's a mirror held up to the human condition, reflecting truths we're still grappling with today. At its core, the story warns of hubris, that dangerous cocktail of arrogance and overconfidence that tempts us to believe we're exempt from the rules. Sisyphus didn't just push boundaries, he smashed through them, treating divine laws as inconveniences to be circumvented. His downfall wasn't just about breaking rules, it was about forgetting his place in the cosmic order. There's a chilling universality to this lesson. How often do we see figures, CEOs, politicians, even ourselves, tempt fate by assuming our cleverness or status makes us untouchable? The myth whispers a hard truth. No amount of ingenuity can outmaneuver the fundamental laws of consequence. Every deception, every shortcut, every defiance accumulates weight until the boulder we've been dodging comes crashing down. Yet the myth's brilliance lies in its duality. While it warns against hubris, it also inadvertently celebrates resilience. Sisyphus's punishment was meant to break him, to grind him into submission. But look closer, there's no mention of him weeping or begging for mercy. He simply turns and starts again. This isn't passive acceptance, it's a quiet, stubborn defiance. Albert Camus seized on this nuance, arguing that Sisyphus becomes heroic not in spite of his struggle, but because of it. The act of continuing, of finding purpose in the push itself, transforms futility into something oddly triumphant. It's a radical idea. Joy doesn't come from reaching the summit, but from the muscles forged during the climb. This lesson resonates deeply in modern life. Think of the artist creating despite obscurity, the nurse working consecutive shifts in a crumbling system, the parent juggling endless responsibilities. Their boulders may not be literal, but the emotional weight is just as real. Camus's insight offers a lifeline. Meaning isn't handed to us, it's crafted through our engagement with the struggle. When a teacher finds satisfaction in that rare aha moment from a struggling student, or when an activist persists despite setbacks, they're embodying Sisyphus's paradoxical victory. The myth shifts from a warning to a challenge. Can we, like Sisyphus, refuse to let our boulders define us? But there's a third, often overlooked lesson: the danger of obsession. Sisyphus's cunning wasn't inherently evil. It was his inability to stop that sealed his fate. Every trickster archetype, from Loki to Bugs Bunny, walks a razor's edge between clever and reckless. The myth suggests that brilliance untempered by wisdom becomes self-destructive. Modern parallels abound. The entrepreneur who sacrifices ethics for profit, the politician who burns bridges for short-term wins. Sisyphus's tragedy wasn't that he was smart, it's that he couldn't conceive of losing. His fatal flaw wasn't ambition, but the refusal to ever step away from the game. Ultimately, the myth's power lies in its refusal to offer easy answers. It doesn't preach resignation or promise redemption. Instead, it presents a stark choice. We can rage against our boulders, we can crumble beneath them, or we can do the hardest thing of all: accept them, and in that acceptance find a strange kind of freedom. The gods thought they were condemning Sisyphus to meaningless labor, but they accidentally gifted him something else entirely: the chance to prove that even in the face of the absurd, the human spirit doesn't have to bend. His hands may be stained with rock dust, but they're never truly empty. They're always full of the next push, the next effort, the next defiant step forward. And in that, there's a lesson that transcends even the gods themselves. So where does this myth collide with your life? Think about it. What's your boulder? Maybe it's the inbox that refills overnight no matter how many emails you delete, or the commute that stretches longer each year without getting you anywhere new. Perhaps it's the creative project you pour yourself into, only to watch it vanish into the algorithmic void. These aren't just annoyances, they're modern-day Sisyphean loops, tasks that drain us precisely because they feel endless and unrewarding. But here's the thing Camus nudges us to ask: what if the futility isn't in the task itself, but in how we frame it? Take something as simple as washing dishes. On the surface, it's the quintessential pointless chore: scrub, rinse, repeat, only to find the sink full again by morning. But what changes if you see it not as a chore, but as a ritual? The warmth of the water, the rhythm of the sponge, the satisfaction of a clean counter. Suddenly, it's not about the dishes staying clean. It's about the act of caring for your space, the meditative break from screens and noise. That shift from "this is meaningless" to "this is mine" is the heart of Camus's rebellion. Now zoom out to bigger boulders, the dead-end job with the soul-crushing paperwork. The gym routine that never seems to change your body, the relationships that cycle through the same arguments. These aren't just struggles, they're invitations to redefine what success looks like. Maybe the job isn't about climbing the ladder. Maybe it's about the coworker you mentor or the skill you hone quietly. Maybe the gym isn't about the scale, but the endorphin rush that sharpens your mind. And those arguments, they're not proof love is failing, but that it's alive enough to fight for. The myth's real lesson isn't that life is futile. It's that resistance to futility is what exhausts us. Imagine Sisyphus stopping mid-hill, sitting on his boulder and laughing at the absurdity. That laughter doesn't erase the labor, but it steals the sting. Your boulders won't vanish, but they might feel lighter when you stop measuring them by how permanently they're moved and start noticing how they shape you in the pushing. So tonight, when you're folding laundry that'll be wrinkled again by sunrise, try this. Fold one shirt slowly, perfectly, just to prove you can. That's not surrender, that's sovereignty. And in a world of endless hills, that might be the closest thing to a summit we get. Sisyphus's legacy is a paradox carved in stone, a warning etched into mythology that somehow became a beacon. On one hand, he stands as the ultimate cautionary tale, a man whose cleverness curdled into arrogance, who thought he could outwit the universe and wound up crushed by its weight. The gods meant his punishment to be a spectacle of futility, a flashing neon sign reading, "This could be you." And yet, millennia later, we're still dissecting his story not just for its moral, but for its unexpected defiance. Because somewhere between the boulder's roll and the hill's cruel slope, Sisyphus stopped being just a lesson and became something far more human, a mirror. Consider how his myth splits neatly down the middle like a cracked boulder. One side shows us the perils of overreach, of treating life like a game to be won rather than a balance to be honored. Every corner he cut, every rule he bent, coiled back around him like a noose. There's a reason his story echoes in corporate scandals and political downfalls. It's the oldest playbook for self-destruction. But flip the stone over and you'll find the other half of his legacy, raw, unvarnished resilience. The man who cheated death twice doesn't weep when the boulder rolls back. He turns, walks down, and starts again. That's not just punishment, it's a masterclass in stubbornness. This duality is why his myth refuses to fade. Artists paint him as both fool and hero. Philosophers cast him as both victim and rebel. Even pop culture can't decide if he's a punchline or an icon, but that friction is precisely what makes him timeless. Life hands all of us impossible tasks, the jobs that feel like treadmills, the dreams that seem perpetually out of reach, the systemic boulders no one person should have to push. Sisyphus's real gift isn't the answer to those struggles, it's the question he forces us to confront. Do we let the boulder define us, or do we redefine the push? So here's where the myth leaves us, not with a tidy moral, but with a challenge. Your boulder might not be a rock, but it's just as real. Maybe it's the project that keeps stalling, the habit you can't kick, or the societal weight that feels too massive to move. Whatever it is, Sisyphus's story whispers two truths. First, recognize when you're the architect of your own struggle. Second, even when the hill is endless, there's power in the act of climbing. Now we turn it over to you. What's the boulder you're pushing these days? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's see how this ancient myth plays out in your world. And if you're hungry for more deep dives into legends that shape us, hit that like button, subscribe, and join us next time as we unravel another tale where the gods and mortals collide. The stories are old, but the struggles, they're always new.